Hi, everybody. My name is Linda Baker. Then what are you supposed to say? Hi, Linda. I know you guys are tired of sitting here because it's a long, long wait. But I want to say just a few words about my dad. He was a hard worker, honest man. I don't recall him ever cussing, except when he hit a nail and hit his finger. But to cuss, just all the time, he didn't do that. He was a tough man. And when the Creator made the mold for my dad, they just threw it away because they don't make them like him anymore. Thank you.
Well, good morning. I'm Byron Baker. I spoke with you guys last year about high explosives and, the fun that you can have with that on a ranch. I thought I'd talk about some different things. I've been thinking about my grandpa Phillip and the things he knew and the skills he had. And, these are things that served him his entire life. He was very pragmatic. There was a practical way of doing everything, a practical approach. And if you stuck to his practical approach, you were then that much better off. He was open to finding new ways to do things, but you had to show him why your way was better. And he of course was an honorable man. I know that he never said anything he didn't mean, and he was straight up with everybody, honest with them. And he was bound by duty. And I say duty because he saw it as his duty to help the younger guys get into ranching. And that was something he did almost on a daily basis. All the knowledge that he had acquired over the years, anybody who wanted to partake of that knowledge, all they had to do was show up and ask him, and he would help them. He wanted everybody to succeed, and he wanted everybody to be successful in ranching like he was. He started off, he was born in 1909, the end of September, on this reservation, and we're not sure on the exact date because in 1909, I think, they weren't keeping track of day-to-day events like we do now. And he grew up riding herd for his uncle. He was 9 when he was expected to ride herd, and the thing that his uncle liked about him was that he was able to do it. He was able to be charged with the responsibilities of an adult, and he carried it through. He went to school in several different places, but ended up finishing in Shamawa, Oregon. This was a Indian school at the time, and part of, I don't know, maybe people don't know this, but part of the federal government policy regarding Indian kids was to get them away from where they grew up and put them in a school hundreds of miles away, and then they would become Americans. Which is ironic because American Indians were not citizens of this country until 1924. So he went to school to become American before he was a citizen. He got into ranching primarily through his uncle, but then he also, through his father, he helped his father maintain the home place. And they had a few cattle, and he got into a cattle relending program whereby you receive these cattle, but when the calves are born, you turn all that in. And that's how you pay it back, and that's how the program keeps going to help other small ranchers. He showed himself to be a pretty good businessman because if you look at the times, You know, they always say times are changing and things change. That's true. You know, at the time he was doing this, he would not have been able to access loans, resources that other people maybe had access to, he didn't. And so in my mind, that makes him that much more successful. He grew his herd to about 300, and he was, you know, self-sufficient. The last 20 years of his life or so, he was debt-free. He didn't have any debt, and he had about 1,200 acres of his own, and then some leases also. He served on the Dunn County Welfare Board for 8 years. He was on the he was a brand inspector for Stockmen's Association, and for at least 50 years, he taught younger cowboys how to do things, and it was pretty much anything they wanted to learn. And he wasn't in the sense of an instructor. He wasn't that. He wasn't that kind of teacher. He would make you, you know, listen to him how to do something, make you explain it back to him, and then you had to do it, which is a pretty effective way to learn something. You're going to catch on or something's going to hurt. So he did all these things, and you know, he stayed with the Stockmen's Association for over 40 years. He ended up in a publication called 50 Years in the Saddle. And, you know, I learned something new about him in this past year that I did not know. Some Canadian guy from Ontario, I don't know where he got his name or whatever, but he put him in a book that he published through the University of British Columbia or something like that. So my grandfather's named in that book as a successful Fort Berthold rancher. And I think about his perseverance. He didn't give up. He was never going to give up. And I can think of a thing that happened to him that I think a lot of people would have given up. He went to St. Paul with his cattle one time to sell them. And he sold them. And before he had a chance to come home, he was robbed. And the entire year's earnings were gone. Now, this was 1939 or 1940. I think I might have just quit and done something else. But he sure didn't. You know, he kept going. The thing I remember about him and my grandma is how they supported each other, how they did everything, you know, mutually dependent. She had a large garden, did all sorts of canning, and we had a root cellar. Those potatoes had to last us all the way through the winter, and they did. And then in 1949, he had to relocate when the Garrison Dam forced that to happen. And we lived in a house constructed out of cottonwood logs. There's 2 rooms in it, and I just figured everybody lived like that, so I didn't think it was any big deal. But in 1977, he had a regular house built, and so we moved into that. So I think about the impact that he has had on all of us, all of his descendants. He had 5 children with his wife Delia, and 3 of them, my mother included, ended up helping him on this ranch. And one of my uncles was a professional cowboy. Milton was a PRCA for a number of years. And then he got drafted into the Army. And, of course, then his brother Lyle joined the Army. And then when they drank, they would argue about that. Why, you had to join, but me, they wanted me. And so that was kind of how things went. And I'll just mention one more skill that he had, because it's a skill that I don't have, that I've never been able to develop. He could reason with someone who was intoxicated. I'll give you a for instance. We were branding calves, and this guy showed up and wanted to help. And his name was Pearly. I'm not going to say his last name. But I watched Pearly, he barely standing up. He's weaving, but I watched him roll a cigarette with one hand. He stuck that thing in his mouth here, and he never lit it. And for 10 minutes, that thing bobbed up and down. But somehow, my grandpa talked him into, you got to have a clear head with these animals. They're going to hurt you. And for a wonder, he listened. I've never been able to do that with anybody that's intoxicated, so I thought that was a skill. But he impacted all of us, and we're proud of him, and I'm thankful for your time and attention today.